speaking of the kind of flip-flop or the pendulum swing thing, I do think too there might be something in regards to how we speak about hell today that might be a result of the pendulum swing.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe talk about that for a bit. But we constantly talk about not hearing homilies about hell.
Yeah,
but what's interesting is I also can't remember how many homilies I've heard about heaven.
Yeah.
It's just almost like we're just dull people who can't imagine one way or the other how good or how terrible things could be. I don't know. But I wonder if as a result of that, there is this push to be like, everyone's going to hell. Faustina is a joke, like the Divine Mercy thing. That's a.
Do people say that?
Oh yeah, have you heard this?
Yikes!
Yeah, this is one of those. This is one of these bad trad things. Like I understand that trads online are different to trads in parishes, and we don't want to kind of confuse the two. But yeah, like right now, I'm sure in the live chat, there's probably some people who are like modernist joke, things like that. And I wonder though, if she spent her time talking about everyone going to hell, if they'd be doing that. I don't know if they would. They'd either just leave it alone or they'd totally get behind it.
Yeah.
But it seems to me that like we live in such confusing times, not just in society, but in the church. Like we need this message of the mercy of God more than ever. But, it's been my experience where if I devote an episode to the mercy of God, there's a lot of people who like try to correct me.
Fascinating.
And I'm like, no, we should preach the gospel in season, out of season. So even if you think it's out of season, we still need to be talking about the mercy of God because there are certain people who need to hear that.
Yeah.
All of us need to hear that.
Yeah.
But, yeah, what's your opinion on that? I mean, I know you live in a different world to me, the tower of academia and all that. But have you encountered this? Like,
I mean, I live in the tower of self-imposed ignorance, just like, well, whatever.
That's where we should have the retreat.
Yeah, there you go. So so first thought is this. I don't think the homily. This is not your main point, but maybe I'm just going to take the opportunity to say it.
Yeah.
I don't think the homily is the place to address many things, right? Because I think one of the principal virtues of a homily is that it proposes God for contemplation, right? But I think that in order to propose God for contemplation, you need to be attuned to this fact that we just covered about prayer, right? That it should be accommodated to a person's attention. Mm-hmm. And I think that for a daily mass homily, 3 to 4 minutes is good. For a Sunday homily, I think maybe 7 to 10 minutes is good. And I think that there are certain doctrines that you can't teach well in a compact unit of speech without potentially upsetting more people than you actually console, help, encourage, instruct, admonish, etc. Right? So there are some things which are just, by virtue of the present political climate, kind of incendiary, kind of upsetting, and I don't think that you should touch those things in such a way where your expectation would be more to upset than to encourage. Does that make of you a coward? I'm sure some people think that it does. I don't, because I think that if you preach the gospel, right, if you preach God and you preach his Christ, you preach the mysteries of, the Trinity of the Incarnation, you preach the mysteries of the redemption and the dispensation of grace, that you're going to start getting people in other contexts where you're able to catechize them, instruct, admonish in a way that's more adequate. And then you can begin taking on these more controverted issues in a way so that the other person doesn't feel like the homily has become a political space where they are now better disposed to receive the teaching. So I just don't think that a homily is always going to be the space in which it's best or most appropriate to address certain concerns. There are things like in the American church especially where I think it's good to preach a couple times a year about abortion, but I'm not sure how often or if one ought to preach about gender ideology or same-sex attraction or things like
Vaccines.
that. Yeah, for instance.
Yeah.
I'm kind of unsettled mind, and I can be of unsettled mind because I don't have care of souls. I'm not preaching to the same congregation week in and week out, so I don't have to make these types of pastoral decisions. So it's like easy for you to say, punk kid. Yeah. I mean, point. But but I was in a parish for like a year and a half, and I thought about it during that time, and I made the decisions that I did, which I just reflected. So then when it comes to like things that you describe, things that have become politicized, I think that you're always going to have people from either direction characterizing your speech in a certain way, shape, or form. So, I don't know if people read comments, but I suspect that comment boxes are a kind of terrible place
Flaming trash heap.
a terrible place in which to encounter this type of acrimony. Yeah. But I think that you start with God, right? And this sound like you would say that, start with God. But you start with God, and then you move on from there. Not in the sense that you leave God behind, but that you explain everything in light of God. So mercy, for instance, St. Thomas talks about it in a non-political setting, right? It's in the prima pars. It's in considerations which pertain to the one God. And he goes through those things that have kind of ruled out creaturely limitations. So he'll say, for instance, he's simple, which is to say he's undivided. He'll say he is, infinite, which is to say he's not limited. He'll say, ... And then he moves into things pertinent to God's intellect and will. And when talking about the will, he talks about love and justice, and he talks about mercy. And there he just does the very simple work of saying, like, what is mercy? You see a sorrowful state, a miserable state, and then you work to alleviate it. In the human case of the kind of like the exhibiting of mercy, you're struck by that sorrowful state. So that sorrowful state causes you misery of heart. Mm-hmm. And then that, in a certain sense, motivates, that pity motivates your response. In God's case, there is no pity, right? Because God doesn't have passions in the way that we have passions. God pre-contains them, right, virtually, supereminently. So he has all the perfections proper to what we experience in our passionate life. But he does alleviate those things in the way that's most efficacious and excellent. Because with respect to God, everything is inferior, right? And mercy is from a superior to an inferior. Not to say that, like, if I, perform some act of mercy for another individual, then I am superior to them qua individual. It's just with respect to this particular difficulty, right? So that's eminently true of God. So when we're talking about mercy, we're talking about something that's metaphysically thick. Now, mercy may have been co-opted by certain voices on the right or on the left and made into something which is more or different than that, and then as a result of which people have a kind of reaction against it in discourse. They'll say, it is what thus and such a person made of it, okay? And especially this has been true like in the last 5 to 7 years as mercy's become a buzzword. And I think that we want to stay kind of clear of that politicization of discourse insofar as we can't permit our language, we can't permit our concepts to be co-opted by contemporary political debates. We need to retain them in their metaphysical thickness and use them as they are meant to be used, but taking every opportunity to clarify our use of those terms so people don't think that we're falling into political tropes, not because we're insecure, but because we want to give people access to the actual things that are being described so that they don't kind of cut off their humanity from the full breadth and depth of God's riches. And if God isn't merciful, then we've got ourselves an incredibly huge problem, because that means that God doesn't act as superior vis-a-vis inferior in a way so as to alleviate sorrow, which means that we're just a bunch of half-bred infants wallowing in a pool of our own filth, which is yikes. So, yeah. I would say reclaim the discourse, propose it in a way that's coherent, that's loving, right? And then try to bring people back into a conversation that embraces both right and left. And I think you're good at this. I think you're good at having conversations with people with whom you might not agree on every point, but kind of holding back. I think cancel culture has made it very, very difficult to host conversations among people who may differ on points, substantive or accidental. So encouragement. Keep killing it.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you for watching this clip. You can click here to watch the full episode. And I want to say a big thanks to our sponsors and to our amazing patrons for making all of this possible. Please do us a favor before you go. Click that subscribe button and then the bell. And that way YouTube will be forced to let you know every time we put out a new episode.